Welcome to Signals and Synapses, the podcast of the Max Planck Institute for Biological Cybernetics in Tübingen, Germany. I'm Sophia Jans, and I'm happy to welcome back Svenja Brodt, who heads the research group Brain States for Plasticity, as well as co-host Simon Faßnacht. In the last episode, Svenja and Simon explored how lasting memories are formed and what this process means for how we learn and navigate the world. Good to see you both again.
Hello.
Hi, happy to be back.
A warm welcome back also to you, our listeners. If you don't remember last month's episode, that's perfect. We might just get to the bottom of why your memory let you down. Well, all jokes aside, even this is their first time tuning in, don't worry, you'll have no trouble following along. Let's jump right back in. Many people know that sleep is important, but few really understand why. Could you explain what actually happens in the brain during sleep that makes it so crucial for learning and memory?
Yeah, sure. So the question why sleep is so important is actually an unsolved one yet, I would say. So if you think of 50,000 years back, if you were a caveman, your world was very, very dangerous for you, right? But still you had to retreat at some point into a cave to sleep for, and that's still the case for us, for 1/3 of your life in the end, while you are exposed to all of these threats, for example, cave bears and whatever there was. So there has to be a really, really crucial function of sleep. And I think now we know that there's not only one crucial function of sleep, but there are several. And one of the most important ones is the role of sleep in memory consolidation. However, there are others that are more related to a homeostatic regulation of sleep, to immune functions, to the clearance of waste in sleep. However, my research is mostly concerned with the effect of sleep on memory formation, memory consolidation. So your question was what happens in the brain during sleep? If we look at the brain activity, and how we look at that is mostly by recording a so-called electroencephalogram that is basically putting electrodes on the outside of the skull and then looking at the electrical signals of the brain that occur.
So you're recording brain waves or brain oscillations, as some people prefer to call them.
Yes, that's how we can call it, yes. So what in general you see is that the pattern of brain waves that occurs during sleep compared to wakefulness is a completely different story. So in the wakefulness state, we have many, many oscillations. They are quite fast. And that corresponds basically to complex information processing in the brain, whereas during sleep, you see a very much simpler rhythm for the most part of sleep, I have to say, where the brain waves are slower, the amplitudes are higher, and this is just a completely different pattern. This pattern occurs during a specific sleep stage, and there's another sleep stage that has different patterns, but maybe we get to that later.
If I remember correctly from the last episode, you touched upon rehearsal as a fundamental property of memory consolidation during sleep, but then also explained that if you rehearse memory content explicitly while awake, you can also form memory. Could you elaborate what this rehearsal looks like while we have this specific brain state of sleep, where we have these very slow oscillations?
Yes.
How do we rehearse there?
Yes. So maybe to briefly summarize, so the general idea of how we form memories is that once we perceive a certain kind of information, we encode that rapidly into the hippocampus. That is a brain region that is located deep inside the brain, a small structure. And then only over time and over many, many repetitions, this memory can be stored for the long term. We think that this long-term storage is mostly located in a different brain system, the neocortex, which is basically on the outside of the brain and contains most of the cell bodies. And in the end, the neocortex is the storage system for the long-term memories. How this transformation from a short-term memory in the hippocampus to a long-term stable memory in the cortex takes place is the idea that this is due to reactivation.
And where does sleep come in here?
The question is, are there specific brain states in which reactivation occurs more abundantly or in a more efficient manner between those two brain systems? And it has been shown that one of these states is sleep, because during sleep, we briefly talked about brain waves earlier, you have these very slow rhythms that basically coordinate activity across the whole brain and make it easier for information to transfer between different regions. So you have these large amplitude waves called slow waves during slow wave sleep, which is one stage of sleep. And within these slow waves, you can basically imagine that there are smaller signals embedded into this rhythm. And these smaller signals are, for example, sleep spindles. I don't know, maybe you have heard about those. They are just called like that because if you look at the readout of these brain waves, you can see that there is a like waxing and waning small wave occurring that looks like an actual spindle. That's why they are called like that. They are basically nested into specific time points of these slower oscillations. And those are generated in another very important region for memory formation consolidation in the thalamus, basically. And then you have, on top of that, riding another even more tiny wave that comes from the hippocampus. They are called sharp wave ripples. And basically the coordination of these three waves allows that information can be efficiently transferred between the hippocampus and the cortex. And this is a very specific state that you basically do not have during wakefulness. And that it has been shown that when these three oscillations are nested into each other, memory replay takes place. That is a term coming from basically animal studies, where you can show that patterns of activity in the brain that are present during, for example, spatial navigation, reoccur in the exact same sequence. So this activity is replayed also during sleep. And that happens when these three oscillations coincide in the most efficient manner, and that also leads to better memory performance later on.
Okay. So if I understood it correctly, the interplay of these three brain oscillations is not the reactivation itself, but it sort of facilitates and enhances the reactivation, which is basically a periodic replay of the brain activity that was present when a stimulus was first perceived, and that what happened when we first saw a stimulus is then like the same thing happens and happens again in the brain.
Yes, exactly. And that is, you are completely right to say that basically the coincidence of these three oscillations facilitates memory consolidation and this contribution of the cortex more, because the replay event itself will also occur during wakefulness. That is not something that is limited to sleep, but the specific thing is that it occurs during sleep coinciding with these oscillations.
Is that in any way noticeable for us, as reliving the experiences of the day in dream?
Yes, there is that is one notion in the field that actually dreams have a crucial function for memory consolidation as well, because you oftentimes dream of events that happened during the day, so you are recapitulating this experience. That is a form of reactivation. However, it's difficult to disentangle. So these reactivation events occur during the whole night, and they occur there's a lot of a high amount of reactivation happening. Whereas if you think of dreams, there are nights probably when you don't even recall a dream. But the question is that because you don't remember, and actually each reactivation would go together with some kind of experience of this previous experience, and you just don't remember later on? Or are dreams different or a specific form of reactivation that is not the most abundant feature of reactivation that happens?
Since we touched upon dreams already, you mentioned that sleep has oscillation properties, that you can measure sleep in brainwaves, and that there are different stages of these. Could you please elaborate how different stages of a sleep cycle contribute to memory formation or consolidation? We already touched upon like slow wave sleep, but there are other phases, right?
Yes. So the main distinction is between two parts of sleep. Basically, you have one part that is called rapid eye movement sleep, REM sleep, and you have another part, and that's the majority of the night that you spend in this second stage, that is called non-REM sleep. REM sleep is something that you can easily recognize if you observe someone else who is sleeping, because this stage is characterized by rapid eye movement. So with closed eyelids, the eyes move in a very, very specific fashion. So this is the one big stage of sleep. And then in contrast, non-REM sleep doesn't have these eye movements, and the non-REM sleep, or you could also call it deep sleep. You have like a distinction into different sleep stages within non-REM sleep, lighter sleep and deep sleep. This is characterized by the slowing of these brain waves that we've discussed. You have the slow oscillations, the spindles, and the hippocampal ripples that occur within this stage. So this stage is also considered most important for the process of memory formation and consolidation. And REM sleep is still a much more mysterious sleep stage, I would say, at the moment. So it has been hypothesized that actually different forms of memories rely on different sleep stages more for consolidation, with like declarative memory, so memory for our everyday experiences, or memory for facts that we learn, relying on non-REM or slow wave sleep, whereas more emotional memories or procedural memories, so when there's a motor component involved, rely more on REM sleep. That still holds true to a certain extent, but I think also we are moving into a different direction that actually is not this classic dichotomy of different memories, and maybe REM sleep might also have a function for declarative memories in the end.
Could you maybe describe where your research comes in here? Like, how does your group tackle these questions about how brain states influence memory formation?
Yeah, so the scope of my group is a bit broader than just looking at sleep, so to say. So on the one hand, we are interested in how are memories in the human brain encoded and consolidated and then recalled, and how can we make these processes visible in the human brain with the limited methods that we have. So we cannot do anything invasively, for example. But then on top of that, the question is, memory formation is not memory formation. So there's different processes happening, and these processes might be different in different states of the brain. And one important distinction is, of course, between wakefulness and sleep. But there might also be other brain states, for example, different cognitive states that you could be in, or different neuromodulatory states. So if you have different levels of specific neurotransmitters, for example, during stress, how does that affect memory formation and consolidation?
And how does your lab investigate that? Could you maybe give us an example of an experiment where you look at how a brain state?
Yes. So on the one hand, if shortly stick to this neuromodulatory perspective. So what we are aiming to do at the moment is to tackle the effects of different neurotransmitters on memory formation and consolidation, and how that affects also different brain regions.
So neuromodulators such as?
Noradrenaline, for example. That is actually the one that we are looking at the moment. So noradrenaline is a very abundant neurotransmitter in the brain, and it is responsible for arousal level, basically. So when you have high levels of noradrenaline, you can be very attentive to a stimulus. You can, if it gets more and more, then it's not going to be functional anymore. But in general, higher levels of noradrenaline means higher levels of alertness, means higher attention, basically. And what we are trying to do here is now to see how different levels of noradrenaline could affect how memories are laid down or stored in the brain. So are different brain regions more prone to store memories if I have a high or a low noradrenaline level? What we do more routinely, I would say, in the lab is basically investigating the role of sleep or different states of sleep. When we have our participants come to the lab, they learn a certain task, so they build a memory. Then we have them sleep in our sleep labs. And then we can investigate how different manipulations of sleep, for example, either having them awake for the whole night or maybe selectively trying to suppress a certain stage of sleep, so non-REM sleep or REM sleep, how that affects memory consolidation and which brain regions are basically contributing to memory.
So what you're doing in practice is you give them an EEG cap and you just wake them up when they're in a certain stage of sleep that you don't want them to experience?
Yes, so that is one approach. We always have to basically monitor in which sleep stage the participants are at a certain point in time. And when we see the first signs of, for example, deep sleep, we would do an acoustic stimulation and basically try to get them out of this sleep stage that we don't want them to have. You can imagine this like a bit of waking up the participants, but not to the full level of waking them up, but just disturbing deep sleep, for example.
And so far, did you find anything about the relationship between these different states, both neuromodulatory and sleep, on memory formation?
So for sleep, on the one hand, we have done experiments that compare, for example, a day of wakefulness with a full night of sleep and how that affects memory. And we combine that again with functional activity imaging, with MRI. And then what we see is very intriguing, actually confirming this idea that sleep specifically contributes to memory consolidation and the transformation into the neocortex. There we have findings showing that actually the contribution of the parietal cortex, which is a specific part of the neocortex, increases across a night of sleep, whereas the contribution of the hippocampus decreases across sleep. So that's completely in line with this idea that sleep contributes to this function, and this is a pattern that we don't observe when participants learn in the morning and then stay awake during the day.
So since sleep is so important because of the replay, is it better to study something in the evening right before we go to sleep? Does that help consolidate the memory? Or better in the morning when we are fresh and awake?
Both are partially true, I would say, because there's different processes in the morning and in the evening where encoding would then lead to better memory. So on the one hand, there's much research more on circadian rhythms, not so much focusing on sleep, that actually show that if you learn in the morning, you will be better able to encode and store these memories just because of different neurotransmitter and hormonal levels that are different in the morning and make you more alert. You are not so fatigued and yet from the day that you have been through, basically. But when it comes to specifically consolidation processes, there's evidence that shows that the closer you repeat or learn something before going to sleep, the better you will memorize afterwards. And the idea is that basically this, you could call that recency effect. So the closer something has occurred, the stronger the trace of this experience is still embedded in the brain. And that might actually lead to a prioritization of what is also reactivated during sleep.
So my personal takeaway is to just take a lot of naps over the day.
There's also studies on naps, actually, that show that already a 20-minute nap could enhance your memory performance. However, a nap is never the same as a full night's sleep because during a nap, normally you will have only non-REM sleep. REM sleep normally doesn't occur during these daily naps, whereas during the night you have full cycles. So this is like around 90 minutes that a cycle of sleep basically takes, where you first progress into very deep non-REM sleep and then you emerge into lighter sleep, you go into REM sleep, and then everything repeats again. And there's actually a lot of research showing that it might be specifically this cycle, so this co-occurrence of non-REM sleep first, REM sleep afterwards, that is also crucial for memory stabilization.
I have a burning question for all the students listening to this episode. Say the next day is an exam day and you're still studying. Should I do an all-nighter or should I go to bed? What would you recommend?
That is a very relevant question, actually. So I would say that depends a bit. We know that sleep is very beneficial for memory consolidation. However, if you imagine a situation where you haven't even encoded all the content that you would need for your exam, sleep won't help because it cannot de novo create memories for you, right? So if you are in a state where you actually need to get more input into the system for sleep to be effective, then I would say no, then reduce your sleep. However, on the other hand, the question is, how does repeating information over the night affect a memory in comparison to sleep in the short term? So performing the exam in the next morning compared to whether you want to retain this information long term. And there I think the message is quite clear. For a short-term performance, you could just keep on repeating the information for the whole night. Whereas if you really want to retain the information, the effects of sleep might outweigh what you can do during wakefulness by repeating.
Okay, so to sum it up, if I'm not yet finished with the content that I have to learn for the exam, I might skip a few hours of sleep in favor of cramming in some more. Okay. It is also very apparent that as we age, we tend to sleep less. Is there any evidence of how like the role of sleep on memory consolidation and formation changes during development?
There's on the one hand, you have the fact that while you are aging, your sleep becomes less efficient, right? Sleep is more fragmented, you wake up during the night. You can also show that sleep is not as deep anymore. And that just by the sheer reduction of the duration of sleep will have an effect on memory. But I think the more crucial thing is that it has been shown that actually this nice alignment of these three oscillations that we touched upon earlier, the slow oscillations, spindles, and hippocampal ripples that are so important for memory consolidation, they get out of phase when you age. So it's not the pathological process that happens during normal healthy aging, that actually this nesting of the spindle into the slow oscillation becomes less less precise as you age. And that has severe effects on memory consolidation.
So when you think of the state of memory research and sleep research in, say, the next 10 years, is there anything that you are particularly excited about? Anything that you, any big questions that you expect to be tackled?
Yeah, so on the one hand, I think one thing that we haven't grasped is the whole picture of how sleep subserves memory consolidation in all its different ways. Because we cannot, at least in the human system, we cannot disentangle the effects of the single contributors that basically make out sleep as a whole state, right? That is one thing where I hope that actually also like more sophisticated imaging methods, maybe also collaboration with animal research might push the boundaries of understanding that as a process. But I think the other super interesting avenue will be that there is a lot of research going on at the moment in terms of how can we manipulate sleep or sleep architecture to enhance memory or also enhance all of the different functions of sleep. Basically, by doing non-invasive brain stimulation at specific time points during sleep, maybe with an auditory stimulation, for example, to push, for example, slow waves, to push the coupling of slow waves and spindles. And I think that is there's very interesting findings to come.
So if you could give one takeaway about memory from your research to our listeners, what would that be?
Memory is a extremely complex process that is dynamic over time. So when you encode something, it doesn't mean that when you recall a day or a week or a year later, and you have other experiences that might have been similar to this first episode that you had, that you will at every point in time recall the same information again. So it's very dynamic. You have, on the one hand, forgetting, but you have integration with other experiences that happen in the meantime. So it's not a static picture of what you have been experiencing, but it's influenced by many, many different things that occur in the meantime.
Awesome. Thanks for these answers. That wraps up today's episode of Signals and Synapses. A huge thanks to Svenja Brodt for her time and expertise, and to Simon Faßnacht for co-hosting and enriching the discussion with his thoughts and questions. And once again, many thanks to everyone tuning in. You can find more details and resources in the show notes. If you liked today's conversation, be sure to subscribe, share the show, and tell a friend about it. As always, stay curious and keep listening.